Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 86 of the Strokecast. This week, I want to talk about a framework for SMART goals. But first of all, in dubious accomplishments, I have managed to now bite the right side of my cheek while eating a sandwich. Now, you may think, yeah, so what? That we do that all the time. Well, here's the thing. It was the right side, my unaffected side. I am well used to now biting the left side of my cheek while I am eating, and I've probably built up quite a bit of internal scar tissue in my mouth there from doing that over the last couple of years. But this time, I managed to bite myself on the other side in a move that is just completely being clumsy and klutzy and not stroke related at all. So, yay? Anyway, one of the things I wanted to talk about this week is the idea of this framework, and I love a good framework. You see, what a framework does is it helps us break down more complex issues and complex processes, especially when confronted with something new. It lets us go ahead and take just this collection of information, this thing that we want to accomplish, and helps us understand its constituent parts, help us understand how things fit together. And when we can get them fitting together the right way, then we can ultimately get some results out of them. You can think of a framework also as a more structured way of approaching context. A framework for understanding how to cook, a framework for understanding how to conduct a presentation, or a framework for setting goals in your recovery. All of these things require lots of different pieces, and having that framework, that meta structure, helps make it easier to accomplish things. There's an old joke about a guy who has to get surgery on his elbow because it's just not working well. And he asks the doctor, so after the surgery, am I going to be able to play the violin? And the doctor is really optimistic about the surgery and says, yeah, absolutely. I don't see any reason why not. And the guy responds, that's awesome, doc, because I've never been able to play before. And you see, that is one of those things that comes into play when we talk about SMART goals. The idea of being able to have a goal involving playing the violin in that context is not relevant at all, and therefore really would not qualify as a SMART goal. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit there. See, those of us who have a background in corporate life involving goal setting, often involving the marketing organizations or the HR organizations or lots of other organizations within corporate life encounter SMART goals, often around our annual performance evaluations and those sorts of projects. Or it can be around other projects, rolling out new projects and rolling out new products, trying to get other things to happen. We talk about SMART goals in the corporate life quite a bit. And those of you who have managed to leave corporate life behind are probably having some kind of scary flashbacks about SMART goals and other corporate speak. And probably started as soon as I used a word like framework. But what I recently discovered was that a lot of people aren't familiar with SMART goals. It's something that has been a part of my corporate life for well over a decade. And it's something that I just assume is just very basic and that everybody is familiar with. And it's a reminder that it's not, that we all have our own expertise and we can be very good at that. But people who are equally smart, equally intelligent, equally hardworking may not know the same things that we do just because they have a different specialty. Just like we don't know a lot of things that they do that they may think is really basic and really simple. And this is something that applies regardless of what you're doing, and it can apply especially in working with medical professionals. A lot of medical professionals are very good at what they do, but they may make some assumptions about what a patient knows, even if the patient doesn't have that same level of expertise. we all live in these personal and professional bubbles around our own knowledge and experience and what is just basic and fundamental. And not everybody in different bubbles is going to share those same basic things. So that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about, these SMART goals, because they are very helpful when beginning with recovery. Because as I went into rehab, when I started rehab, one of the first things they asked me is, what are your goals? What are your goals for recovery? And in fact, whenever you go through an evaluation for a new PT or OT or speech therapist, you're probably going to have to answer the question, what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? My first goal, and what went up on the whiteboard in the hospital, was I want to recover everything. I probably should have said world domination, but I'm not certain that either one of those was necessarily an appropriate goal. Neither of those was a SMART goal. So what is a SMART goal? It's probably about time I actually explain this. SMART goal breaks down what you need to have in a goal in order to be at something that you can actually achieve. A SMART goal is simple, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So, for example, a SMART goal would be one that I articulated at the beginning of the year, that I want to run 100 meters in 30 seconds by the end of the year. Now, at this point, I don't think I'm actually going to achieve that goal this year because, well, I haven't done all of the work I need to, but it is a SMART goal. It's simple. You can hear that goal and you know what it's about. It's measurable in that there are specific quantifiable things in there. It is achievable if I did the work. Probably achievable. That can be something you need to discuss with your therapists. It is relevant to the idea of recovering the use of my legs, and it is time-bound, as in I put a framework of time around that, so it meets those SMART standards. So let's take a little closer look at that and break that down a little bit further as we start looking at how do we go ahead and build the goals so that we can achieve them. SMART, again, we are breaking down each of those letters. What does it mean to have a SMART goal? Start with that S. Is your goal simple? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy, but it has to be something that you can easily articulate, that you can easily explain. Keep your goal simple, basic, something that when you say what it is, you can understand what it is, and other people can understand what it is. Because if your goal is too complex, too complicated, there's going to be way too many moving parts that are associated with it, and it's going to be a lot harder to determine at the end if you've actually gone ahead and accomplished it. So keep it simple. That could be walking. It could be related to swallowing. It could be related to doing certain arm motions. It could be related to vocabulary. Whatever it is, keep it simple and keep it clear. The M in SMART goal stands for measurable. And this is one of those areas where we can get all really fuzzy in our goal setting. And when you make it measurable, now you're taking out some of that fuzziness. Instead of saying, I want to run, which isn't really necessarily measurable, I want to run a specific distance, 100 meters, in a specific time, 30 seconds. Those are key elements of that. Since it's measurable, we can actually get out there and see at some point if I have, in fact, accomplished the goal. Because that's the thing, we want to accomplish our goals, but if it's not a measurable goal, if we cannot put a concrete measurement on that goal, then there's no way for us to know if we've gone ahead and achieved that goal. You know, if I want to say, my goal is to be happy. Okay, great. How do we measure happiness? If we can't measure happiness, then how can we know if I've achieved that goal? So you start looking for other ways to measure that. But keep your goals simple and keep them measurable. If they're simple, you can understand it. If they're measurable, you can know if you actually achieved it. The A in SMART goals is for achievable. You want your goal to be achievable. You want it to be something that you can actually do. And there are a lot of things that would be simply not realistically achievable. If I said I wanted to be typing at 120 words per minute in the next week, well, sure, that's simple. It's easy to understand that. It's certainly measurable. There are key metrics on that. But is that something that is achievable in that time frame? Probably not, given my current condition. I can type with one hand at 30 words a minute, but my left hand just doesn't have the extension and the flexibility and the speed to do that yet, and to do that at this point. And in that week, we're certainly not going to get there. But that's the thing. You want to make sure those goals are achievable. If I established a goal for being a tightrope walker at the end of my recovery, if I had a history of being involved in circus acts, then maybe that would be an achievable goal. But I never had that history before the stroke, and I don't think I am going to acquire those skills in the short term because, among other reasons, I really don't care to. But it's simply not necessarily going to be achievable. So a SMART goal is going to be simple. It has to be measurable. It has to be achievable. It has to be something that makes sense that you can do. And if you're not sure if that's going to be achievable, be sure to talk with your therapist, talk with your doctors, understand, is this something they can probably do? And if the answer is, maybe, I don't know, go ahead and do it. It's theoretically achievable. It's something you can probably do. And there's a lot of value in pushing yourself to get there and in pushing things you may not have thought you could do. So you can absolutely push yourself as long as, your SMART goal is, at least in theory, achievable given your resources and the work that you are willing to do. The R in SMART goals is for relevant. Is that goal relevant to what you are trying to do? In the old joke about the guy going to play violin is, playing violin, it's not really relevant to his recovery because it has nothing to do with the recovery. It has absolutely nothing to do with that because it was never something he had beforehand in that context. In my case, I could describe one of my recovery goals as going ahead and expanding my vocabulary by 10% in a certain time frame. But, that's not necessarily a really relevant goal to my recovery because my stroke didn't impact my speech or my vocabulary. So it's not really relevant. It doesn't really apply. And if it doesn't apply, it doesn't really qualify as a SMART goal. This is something that's really easy to see in corporate life. So, for example, if in my job as a corporate trainer, and I set one of my annual goals to go ahead and write a new feature for Microsoft Word in code, that's not really relevant. It's not a task that makes any sense given my job description. It's not relevant and therefore is not really a SMART goal. And besides, the last thing you want me doing is writing code. So we talked about simple, we talked about measurable, we talked about making them achievable, we talked about making them relevant. The final element is time-bound. You have to make your SMART goals time-bound. That means they have a deadline. There is a date by which you want to achieve this goal. And you know what? Maybe you missed that date. Maybe you have to change the date halfway through the process, like I am with my the goal I articulated at the beginning of the year of running. I don't think I'm going to get there by the end of the year because, I haven't done all the work I need to do. But so you can change that. But when you have it's time bound, that's another key thing you need to have in order to say whether or not you've achieved it. Additionally, making it time-bound means you can also develop a work-back schedule. And work-back schedule is another term we use a lot in the corporate world when it comes to planning. A work-back schedule says that, okay, if I want to be able to do this on December 31st, That means I have to do this 3 weeks before. That means I have to do this 3 weeks before that. And on to get back to the different steps you have to take. So, for example, if I said I wanted to be able to run 100 meters in 30 seconds by the end of the year, that means I probably need to be able to run 100 meters by mid-November. And maybe I can do it slower, but I have to be able to get to that point, which means that, so maybe in order to get to that point in mid-November, by the beginning of October, I need to be able to run 10 meters. And maybe in order to be able to run 10 meters by the beginning of October, that means that by the beginning of September, I need to be able to run just a few feet and get both my feet off the ground. And in order to do that by September, maybe that means I have to, by beginning of August, I have to be able to jump straight up in the air by a foot or 2 feet or whatever it is. And when it's time bound, then you can build out that work back schedule. You have to figure out how far in advance you need to be able to accomplish these individual milestones. And when you can accomplish those milestones, then you can work on the next thing. Because again, when we talk about achieving these goals, when we talk about doing this, there's a lot of different parts to it. There's lots of different elements that we have to do in order to get there. And that's where this framework helps, and the work back schedule helps, because it breaks it down into those individual components. Because it's one thing to say, I just got to work on doing the running. That's not necessarily helpful. But once I've broken it down into the work back schedule, once I've broken it down into those constituent parts, then I can do exercises or therapy specifically around jumping. And in order to be able to jump, maybe that means I need to stretch my calves and do more leg exercises. So I can break it down to that individual part and work on that. And as I focus on building up each of these individual parts, that all adds up to the bigger overall activity and to ultimately achieving that goal. So the point is, there's a lot of value in looking at your recovery goals in the SMART context. It helps you understand just what it is that you need to do in order to get there. It helps give you the tools to figure out how you're going to accomplish that goal. And when you have those tools, when you have that knowledge, when you have that information, then you can go ahead and do the work. So keep your goals SMART: simple, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And that brings us to our hack of the week. And this week's hack is a follow-up from my recent conversation with Dr. Deborah Meyerson and her husband, Steve.
I think one just little pithy line that we kind of sometimes come back to a lot is forget the dis in disability. It's how can you live your life more. We talk in the book a lot about looking forward, not back. Another way to put that is how can you think about how to use the abilities you have, not focus on the gaps that are created by your disabilities. And I think that overarching philosophy has been one of the things that Deb tries to stay centered on. It's hard. I mean, you slip back all the time into the frustration of what you can't do. But the more you can focus on, okay, what can I do with what I have? Yeah. That's been a huge thing.
Yeah.
And before I go, I do want to offer one note of apology. There was no episode last week. I was in New Orleans for a work event, and it was a great event and really pushed me in my recovery in a number of ways. I had expected to be able to go ahead and record the episode from the hotel room, but it turns out I just did not have the spoons. I just did not have the energy. One of the things that's been great about my return to work full-time with the fine folks at Microsoft has been that I do have more time in my day simply because I'm not losing time to worrying about the next paycheck and, trying to maintain the freelance hustle all the time, which is certainly its own thing and is certainly great, but it's nice to have that extra foundation. And I've talked about that before, so I'm not going to belabor that point. But that also means I'm still adjusting. I'm still adjusting my publication schedule here. I'm still adjusting how all the other moving pieces of my life go ahead and fit together. And unfortunately, that meant that last week had no episode. And I do apologize for that. I'm hoping to maintain the weekly schedule going forward. And I've got some really exciting interviews scheduled for the next several weeks that I'm really thrilled to be able to bring you. So be sure to keep an eye out for those. So as you go forward in your recovery, try to apply the SMART framework to your goals. If you're having any difficulty with that, go ahead and comment over on this post at strokecast.com/goals, and we'll let the community help further refine the goals that you want to achieve using the SMART framework. Be sure to share this episode with 3 other people that you know by giving them the link strokecast.com/goals. You can go ahead and follow me on Instagram, where I am at Bills_Strokecast. Fairly easy. You can find that right on Instagram by searching for it, or just go to strokecast.com/Instagram. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.